In this video, I'm going to show you how to dual boot between Windows and a Linux Mint using a modern laptop. So in this example, you can see I'm using Windows, but if I reboot the laptop, so restart it, what you'll notice is that it shows a Linux boot menu. So if I do nothing at this point, it's going to boot into Linux Mint. And there you go, we've booted into Linux Mint. So I could close this welcome screen. As you can see here, I could open applications like LibreOffice and write a document using Linux. So what I'll do here is simply reboot the laptop again. When the boot menu displays, I will boot into Windows rather than into Linux. And there you go, I've booted back into Windows. So in this video, I'm going to show you all the steps on how to dual boot between Windows and Linux Mint on a modern laptop. You may encounter issues like I did when I tried to dual boot using this modern laptop. As an example, this laptop by default had BitLocker enabled, so I had to disable that to install a Linux and dual boot between Windows and a Linux. This laptop also uses Secure Boot, which is supported with Linux Mint. So you don't have to disable that, but you may have to disable Secure Boot if you use other operating systems. So in other words, other Linux distributions. So I'm going to show you all the steps. I'm going to show you how to download Linux Mint. I'll show you how to download Rufus, which we're going to use to write the ISO image to a USB thumb drive or USB stick like this. I'll show you how to set up partitions because we are going to install Windows and Linux side by side on the same hard drive or same SSD in this laptop. Now, if you're using a desktop, it's better, if at all possible, to install Linux on a separate hard drive or separate SSD to Windows because the bootloaders can interfere with each other. But that's not possible in this example because I've got a laptop and I don't want to open it up and change the SSD or insert extra SSDs, etc. I want to simply dual boot with the laptop that I currently have between Windows and Linux. So we're going to install Linux and Windows side by side. So I'm going to be showing you a whole bunch of steps in this video. Use the timestamps below to jump to the relevant parts of the video that you're most interested in. Now I'm using a fantastic little device here. It's called a JetKVM. That allows me to remotely control the laptop and also record the screen. So as an example, I am running a Mac here. I have connected to the JetKVM. I can set it to full screen, etc. But I can also remotely control the laptop and record the screen when it's rebooting or when I'm doing the installation. So that's why I've got the laptop here, but I'm looking at my computer in front of me because I'm simply remotely controlling the laptop using the JetKVM. So as an example, when it's booting up like this, I can control the laptop using my local computer through the JetKVM, and I get a good screen recording of the laptop as it's booting or when I'm doing the installation. The resolution isn't as high as the laptop, but that doesn't matter. It allows me to see things as I'm working with the laptop. So great little device, the JetKVM. I'm not sponsored to say that, by the way. I purchased the JetKVM myself. Now, I will say this, GCOM have given me this laptop. So I'm going to mark this video as sponsored, but they're not paying me to create this video, and they're not going to have any input in the results or output of this video. What I simply want to show you in this video, that using a modern laptop, so thanks to GCOM for sending me this laptop so that I can do this. So I want to show you using a very modern laptop that it's possible to dual boot between Windows and Linux, even if Microsoft are doing all kinds of things to make things more difficult, like using Bitdefender to encrypt data files, etc. I'm going to show you how to turn that off and how to get things working even with a modern laptop. But that's enough talking. Let me show you all the steps now. Now, before you even get started with the installation, you need to make some decisions. There are certain steps that you need to take before you get started. Number one, back up your data. Highly recommend that you back up your data. When you change partitions and you do things, which we're going to do in this video, it can affect your data. Something could go wrong. So number one step is back up your data. Once you've done that, the next thing we need to do is disable BitLocker. We are going to have issues if we try and install Linux alongside Windows on the same SSD or hard drive on our computer. So I'm going to assume that you've backed up your data. I'll show you how to disable BitLocker. So the first thing I'm going to do is search for BitLocker. So manage BitLocker. This is in Control Panel. So under Control Panel, System and Security, BitLocker drive encryption. You can back up your recovery key. So as an example, back it up to your Microsoft account. I don't have a Microsoft account, so I'm going to simply save it to a removable drive. So I'll save it to this drive. The recovery key has now been saved. So I can remove my drive. So I'll eject that. So I've now saved the recovery key onto this drive. I am going to insert a separate USB drive or USB stick into my computer, so a different one, which I'm going to use for installing Linux. It's actually got that software installed already, but we'll wipe that and install a Linux on that drive. But again, you may want to save your BitLocker recovery key to your Microsoft account. Be aware of the privacy issues if you do that. Microsoft has provided those keys to law enforcement to allow them to decrypt people's computers. So you may want to store that offline, or you may simply want to print the recovery key. I'm going to click finish there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off BitLocker. So I'm going to turn it off. It may take a long time to decrypt your data. So be aware of that. So you can see BitLocker is decrypting the drives. I can check my drives by right-clicking on the Windows icon, going to disk management. And at the moment, you can see that that drive is BitLocker encrypted. So it needs to be decrypted. So that could take a long time depending on your drive. But be aware, if you don't do this, you're going to have issues when you try and install Linux Mint, as I'm showing you now on screen. I tried to do this without BitLocker disabled, and I wasn't able to install Linux on the computer. We can actually see that on the Ubuntu website. Mint is based on Ubuntu. As they show you here, the Ubuntu installer might inform you that you can't proceed without first deactivating Windows BitLocker. And as an example, they have a section on BitLocker and Ubuntu installation, and they say, if you're using BitLocker, the hard drive content isn't accessible and it appears as random noise, the Ubuntu installer can't correctly map data and cannot install alongside Windows without data loss. And additionally, some manufacturers ship systems with BitLocker enabled, but the hard drive content is not yet encrypted. In this case, the Ubuntu installer also can't correctly map the data. So what can you do? You can cancel your installation and continue using Windows. Decide that the stored data on Windows is not important and override it, or Ubuntu can erase everything, or you can decide to turn off BitLocker. And that's what we've decided to do here. And then they have a section where they show you how to disable BitLocker. I've basically shown you that here. This is why you want to back up your data before you do this kind of stuff. As we can see here now, BitLocker is turned off. I didn't have a lot of data on this computer, so BitLocker is now turned off. So what I'll do is right-click on the Windows icon and go to Disk Management again, make that slightly bigger, and notice BitLocker is not enabled on that partition at all. Okay, so now that we've backed up our data and we've disabled BitLocker, we can install Linux. So let's get to the interesting part, setting up the laptop to install Linux. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is insert the USB drive into the computer so that we can get started. And I am going to use a browser to download the required software. I'm going to use Brave here. You could use Edge if you want to. Brave, however, is a browser that I'd recommend that you use. So we're going to go to linuxmint.com and we're going to click download. Now in this example, there are two versions that you can download. I'm going to download this first version, very popular. And then scrolling down, you need to choose a mirror to download the software from. So as an example, if you're in the US, you could download the software from somewhere, let's say Harvard as an example, and download it. Okay, so the next piece of software that you need is Rufus. So you can download that by going to rufus.ie. I'll put links to the websites below to help you. But all I'm going to do now is scroll down and I'm going to get the portable version. You could get the standard edition if you wanted to, but I'm going to download the 64-bit version of Windows because that's what I'm using here. So I'll go to my downloads folder. And what you can see here is Rufus has downloaded. I'm still waiting for Mint to download, but I've previously downloaded the software in preparation for this video. But what I'll do is start the installation of Rufus. Now we asked, do you want to allow Rufus to check for application updates online? If you're really concerned about privacy, say no here. But in my example, I'm just going to say yes so that I can get updated versions of the software. And as you can see, it's picked up that I have a USB thumb drive inserted or USB stick inserted. It's 128 gig. You don't need such a big USB drive. 16 gig, 32 gig is fine. We then need to specify the ISO that we're going to install. So I'm going to click select, and in my example, I'm going to go to my Linux ISOs. So in other words, the ISOs that I had previously downloaded. And as you can see here, I've got Linux Mint selected. So I'm going to click open to open that. And now you can see that the format options are shown. So I'm going to click start to start writing the ISO to the drive. Now be careful, this is going to be wiped. So anything on that drive is going to be destroyed. So make sure that you've backed up anything important on that drive. In my example, there isn't anything important on that drive, so I'm okay wiping it. So I'm going to click start to write the software. Now you've got two options here. You can either use ISO image mode or DD image mode. So because that's a recommended option, that's what I'm going to use. And I'm going to click OK to start the write. Now in this example, a download is required. The image uses Grub 2.1.2, but the application only includes the installation files for Grub 2.1.4. A different version of Grub may not be compatible, so select yes to connect to the internet and attempt to download the correct version. So I'm going to say yes to download the correct version. And then we get another warning. Do we want to download the software? Yes. And then we get a warning that all data on the drive will be destroyed. So I'm going to click OK because I'm happy to delete everything on that drive and then write the image to the USB flash drive. So as you can see there, it's formatting the drive. It's now copying the image. So I'm going to speed up the video at this point while the files are copied. You simply need to wait for the files to be copied across at this point. Okay, and there you go. It's now written. So I'm going to click close. And now I'll be able to boot off the USB drive and install Linux. Now, before we install Linux Mint, one of the things I like to do is go to disk management and resize the partitions at this point. Now, you can resize partitions during the installation process, but I prefer doing it here in Windows. So what I'm going to do is right click on my NTFS partition. You can see this is about 1.8 terabytes in size. And I'm going to shrink this volume. So basically, I'm going to make some space available so that I can install Linux Mint. And you can decide how big you want this to be. I'm going to just make it 500 gig. But you could make it a terabyte as an example, however big you want it to be for your Linux installation. I'm going to shrink that volume now. And there you go. You can see we've got about 488 gig of free space. Windows has about 1.3 terabytes of space. So I'll close that down. And what I'm going to do now is press and hold Shift. And at the same time, I am going to restart Windows because I want it to boot off the USB. So what I'm going to do now is say use a device, and I'm going to select my removable device. Okay, so we have various options now. We can start Linux Mint. We can use compatibility mode. We can boot from next volume, look at firmware settings, etc. But I'm simply going to boot Linux Mint because that's what we want to do. We're going to boot basically a live image, which then will allow us to install Linux Mint. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is double click install Linux Mint. The language that I'm using is English, so I'm going to select that and click continue. In my example, I'm going to use US English, so I'm going to use that option and click continue. Now, you probably want to connect to a Wi-Fi network so that it can download third-party software, download updates, etc. So I'm going to select my Wi-Fi network and put in my password. So put in your password and click connect, and then I can click continue. Okay, I'm going to install multimedia codecs, which allows me to play some video formats. That means I need to use secure boot. So I'm going to put in my password. So I'm going to specify a password and click continue. Now you have a few options here. You can install Linux Mint alongside the Windows Boot Manager. So that's typically the option you want to use if you just want an easy installation. But I have had problems at times, so you might want to use something else. If you want to erase Windows entirely, you can erase the disk and install Linux Mint. But be careful, that's going to delete everything. So I'll choose the first option, and let's make sure that it installs in the right place. So I'll click Install Now. And what it's done is it says that it's going to make changes on my NVMe drive, which is correct. So it's going to create these partitions on my NVMe drive. Now, if you want to specify it yourself, you can choose something else, click continue, and then you can have a look at your various drives. So I could select my drive. This is my 2 terabyte drive, and I could decide how to create partitions on that drive. So as an example, configure partitions in that free space. So click plus and create a partition. But I'm going to do it the easy way. I'm just going to get Linux Mint to do all the work for me. So I'm going to say install Linux Mint alongside the Windows Boot Manager. Click install now. But please just make sure that it's making the changes on the right drive so that it creates right partitions on the drive. So that's good for me. So I'm going to click continue. You can specify your time zone. I'll just specify New York for the moment. Click continue. I'll specify my name. I could change my computer name if I wanted to. I could specify a username and password. I'm simply going to set a very basic password, and I'm going to allow it to log in automatically. You probably don't want to do that. You're going to want to use strong passwords and require that your password be used when you log in. You could encrypt your home folder if you wanted to. I'm not going to do that here because I want to be able to read the Linux files from Windows and Windows files from Linux. So I'm going to click continue, and now it starts copying the files for my installation. And there you go, the installation has finished. We are told that we can continue testing Linux Mint if we want to, or we can reboot the computer. So I'm going to click restart now to reboot it. We're now told that we need to remove our USB drive or USB stick and then press enter to continue. And there you go, the computer is now rebooting. Now I get a message saying perform MOK management. I'm going to say continue boot, and let's see what it says. Notice we have the option to boot into Linux Mint, or we can boot into Windows. So I'm going to boot into Linux Mint. Okay, so welcome screen shows saying welcome to Linux Mint. There are some options that you can have a look at here, like first steps. You can change your desktop colors. There's a bunch of options that you can use, such as updating your drivers, etc. I'm going to simply close that. And what I can do now is look at different applications. What I will do here is change the display so that it's mirrored. So I'll apply that. It will drop the resolution a lot though, but I'll keep the settings just so that I have it over here as well as in front of me so that I can remotely control this. Now Linux Mint, like a lot of Linux distributions, comes with software that you may find very useful. As an example, if I go to Office, LibreOffice is available. Free software. You don't need Microsoft Word. You can go on the internet. So as an example, I could start Firefox and simply go to a website such as davidbombal.com. And there you go, the website displays. Now again, I've dropped the resolution a lot here because I'm remotely controlling the computer. I could go to google.com and obviously go to whichever website I wanted to. So let's go to chatgpt.com as an example. So there you go. I have a web browser. I have software. I have Office software here. In this video, I'm not going to go through all the software that's available to you. As you can see, I'm connected to Wi-Fi. I was able to go onto the internet. I could update my operating system and do this all through a graphical user interface rather than having to go through the CLI. There are various Linux distributions that you can use if you're new to Linux. I personally prefer Zorin OS for someone who's new, but Linux Mint is another great option. Again, just in case people are concerned about the low display here, that's only because I have mirrored the displays. So if I say reset to defaults, the screen has a much higher resolution. I'm simply controlling it remotely once again through my JetKVM. That just lowers the resolution. But there you go. I have got Linux Mint installed on this laptop. Now, before we end off, I'm going to reboot the computer. So I'm going to say restart. And hopefully what it'll do now is reboot and give me the option to boot into Windows. So you can see the laptop is booting up. And I could choose either Linux Mint or the Windows Boot Manager. I'll choose Windows so that I can boot into Windows. And there you go, I've booted back into Windows. And again, if I reboot this computer, so simply restart it, I should have the boot menu that allows me to boot back into Linux or back into Windows. And there you go. So let's choose Linux. So there you go, we've booted into Linux Mint. As an example, once again, I can have a look at various applications. So I could open up a web browser and go to the internet. So as an example, I could go to my website, and there you go, or go to google.com, etc. So I have internet connectivity. I can run applications, once again, like LibreOffice, and create a document here. Okay, so I hope this video has helped you. I hope that I've been able to show you all the steps to dual boot between Windows and Linux Mint. You don't have to use Linux Mint. I'm just showing you that as an option. You may prefer Zorin OS or Ubuntu or another distribution. Steps are very similar between these distributions, but I'm hoping this has helped you. Let me know in the comments if there's anything else you want to learn about, if there's anything that I've missed. But hopefully this video has helped you. I'm David Bombal, and I want to wish you all the very best.